Okay, trying again because my first attempt at this ran for 30 minutes. I'll go ahead and post that as well, but I'll get here. There has been commentary about Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, the movies, about how Jackson made him a little bit more reluctant to take up the role of the new king, and not wanting to admit that he's Elendil's heir or all that, and the whole "you're Elendil's heir" is not Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself, and stuff like that. There's a whole lot of talk that some people say that they're glad that change was made because he was kind of a boring, invincible hero in the book, and they're glad that they made him more flawed in the movie, and that maybe that was Jackson's effort to make him look more quote-unquote believable because, again, he was the boring, invincible hero. It doesn't take into account the fact that having Aragorn as so wholly powerful as he is, without not out having much magic, I mean, really any magic, as skilled and badass as he is not enough to win the war. And beyond that, he knows he's not enough to win the war. If Aragorn were truly a boring, invincible hero, as the trope indicates, the Lord of the Rings would have ended with Aragorn marching through the hordes of Mordor, laying siege to the Dark Tower, climbing up to the top of it, facing Sauron, taking on Sauron face to face, and killing him again like his ancestor did. And then afterwards, Frodo would be able to safely drop the ring into the volcano. That would be boring, invincible hero. That, despite the being hugely outnumbered, Aragorn would himself end the war by killing off the leader again. Though we already know it's only a temporary death as long as the ring exists, and then Frodo would throw it into the volcano afterward. But that at that point, throwing the ring into the fire is going, as far as the reader is going to be, is just going to be a denouement. It's an epilogue. It's not the climax that it was in the book. If you have Aragorn and his friends take on Sauron ahead of time, like you would in a, let's see here, it's not heroic fantasy. If you had heroic fantasy rather than high fantasy, which Tolkien is basically the terminite, the one that defines the concept of the high fantasy. If it was a heroic fantasy, then you would have the boring, invincible hero cutting his way through the mobs to take out the enemy leader in a duel or face-to-face battle. That doesn't happen. Nothing Aragorn does, he is intended to end the war in and of itself. He does not expect any of his efforts to do more than buy time. If Frodo fails, he knows that his mission will fail. His mission to protect people would fail if Frodo fails. He's aware of this. The fact is that the only thing he's capable of doing is distracting Sauron. And he starts taking up that role soon after re-meeting Gandalf in Two Towers. Okay. Look at the very key differences in the way things are run for the Fellowship before the breaking of the Fellowship and after the breaking. You go from let's actually go back to Hobbiton. You go from Hobbiton to Rivendell to Moria to I don't have my books out, and I can't remember the name of the place off the top of my head this late at night. The place where the fellowship breaks. Everything in those cases is geared towards secrecy. So geared is it towards secrecy that Gandalf is very reluctant to even use his magic to create a campfire when they're facing the snowstorms on Caradas, which were not sent by Saruman, by the way. And Gandalf says afterwards, as soon as he sets the fire, so there I've now told everyone for hundreds of leagues, or whatever the equivalent statement was, that Gandalf is here. Now I've told our enemies where we are. The only reason I did this is because some of us would die if I didn't. Everything up to that, they go through Moria trying to avoid attention. They go through, they end up in Lothlorien, and that Galadriel is able to keep off attention from them, but better than Gandalf was. But even then, after coming out of Lothlorien, they're still trying to stay hidden. At that point, their movements are already being tracked, and they get ambushed by both Saruman's forces and Sauron's. Well, actually, they get ambushed by Saruman, and Sauron's come in later. Or the Misty Mountains. I don't know if they're directly from Sauron. Saruman's forces ambushed them anyway. Up to that point, Aragorn, the entire fellowship is geared towards secrecy. After the fellowship breaks, Aragorn goes off and Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas go off to go rescue the halflings, which leads them to meeting Rohan, the Rohirrim under Éomer, and then meeting Gandalf in his returned form, and being told that the hobbits are fine, though they're off doing something else. Then you start going to Helm's Deep. Rohirrim, the Aedoras first. Aedoras, Aragorn doesn't do much. Aragorn acts as basically Gandalf's bodyguard, along with Gimli and Legolas. And he's not really a big part of that, where at that point Gandalf is very blatantly and publicly clearing away Saruman's influence from King Theoden. And I don't know if it was as blatant and magical as it was in the movie, but I really don't have a problem with it that it was. It is always described as a healing in the books, and so that works for me. Now, granted, I'm going to go over that later. Anyway, different rant. After Theoden is cured, and Gandalf advises him to go off to Helm's Deep, which is a difference from the movie. In the movie, Theoden wants to go to Helm's Deep, and Gandalf wants him to fight it out on the open plain. In the book, Theoden wants to go fight it out on the open plain with as many people as he can get as quickly as he can, and just obliterate as many orcs as possible in probably a campaign that would last for months, trying to hunt down every orc band. And Theoden had enough people to win, but it would take months. And it wouldn't really be the big spectacular thing Gandalf wants. So Gandalf advises him to go to Helm's Deep and send his own people up to the caves behind Aedoras. There were no civilians in Helm's Deep for that battle. Éowyn wasn't there for that battle. They were all up above Aedoras in some high hills that are really hard to get to. Anyway, so he goes after going to Helm's Deep. That's still not Aragorn. The Helm's Deep is a big thing meant to catch Sauron's eye that, hey, they brought down Saruman, my little tool over there. They brought him down. That's with, and he was outnumbered at the time. He didn't have enough time to gather his full force and actually take out Saruman. Saruman had his full forces gathered. Theoden did not, and yet they still won. In pretty much one battle, and they awoke the Ents as well. This is a very public and blatant thing. After these distractions, they're pretty much Gandalf's manipulations. Aragorn comes up with his own. He starts adding to Gandalf's stratagem. this is where, in the Return of the King, they do this by having him come up with, hey, we'll march on the Black Gate and act as a distraction. That was pretty much Gandalf's plan from get-go, is to do that sort of thing. So the idea of Gandalf giving up and, hey, this is a good idea, let's do a distraction, the idea of him going, hey, that's a good idea, in the movie was really kind of, Anyway, after Helm's Deep and facing Saruman, Aragorn starts getting into the act of playing the distraction on his own without waiting for Gandalf to give him ideas. And the first thing Aragorn does is he takes the captured Palantir and uses it. Yes, no, it wasn't that thing in the movies where you see him pull it out of Pippin's hand and it has to be taken away from him. He has to get rid of it before Saruman gets in his mind. No, Aragorn went up to the Palantir and deliberately faced Sauron. Didn't just use the Palantir and try to sneak around. He took up the Palantir and challenged Sauron face to face. Mind to mind. He went into a psychic battle with Sauron. And there is no telling whether he would have won or not. My thought is leaning towards not, but he did pull off when he started the fight. Sauron wasn't sure who he was. He suspected but didn't know for sure. So Aragorn decided to prove it by taking the sword of Elendil, which had been reforged, and basically pulling it up into the Palantir and pointing at it and saying, hey, look, this is the sword that killed you before. And then after you were dead, it cut your ring off. I put it back together and I'm holding it. That's what he did. And Sauron, being the wimp bully that he is, because he's a very big manipulator. When it comes to fighting, if he's doesn't have overwhelming force, he runs away. That's consistent throughout all of the stories that involve him, all the way back to Luthien and Beren. He is a manipulator. He's not a fighter. Anyway, so Sauron runs away from the mental battle, leaves Aragorn in command of the Palantir, which Aragorn uses to look at the things going on in the world, and sees the Corsair ship coming up on Minas Tirith, which is keeping the allied nations of Gondor, the nations allied to Gondor, keeping them occupied so that they can't send reinforcements to Minas Tirith. Not only does he get this useful information, he's just basically did a big FU sign to Sauron, and now Sauron's not looking anywhere close to his own borders anymore. He is off looking at Aragorn. He is wondering how he could have missed Isildur's heir getting that close to, and at one point he knows that Aragorn was part of the Fellowship protecting the ring. He didn't know Aragorn was Isildur's heir, even if he suspected. And so now he's terrified that Isildur's heir is trying to replace him and is going to take the ring. That's his biggest fear, is someone taking the ring and using it and becoming the next Sauron. So he's afraid that Aragorn is going to be using the ring. This is exactly what Aragorn wanted. This is exactly what Gandalf wanted. This is not boring invincible hero territory. This is, I'm the distraction. This is more Xanatos' character. And somebody would say that, hey, but he's such a good manipulator, he's outfoxing Sauron. That makes him even more of a boring invincible hero. Not really. Sauron's good at manipulating others. He's not so good at avoiding being manipulated himself. Also something that goes all the way back to Luthien and Beren. He's too arrogant to. He's way too arrogant to be good at figuring out. To be good at detecting when people are tricking him. That's Sauron's problem. Even if he's good at tricking other people, he's not good at spotting tricks for himself. Not nearly as good anyway. He's better than probably most mortals, but he's not as good. And he's facing off against Gandalf and Aragorn for that. Any case, after Aragorn faces off against Sauron in the Palantir and wins, with a cheap trick but still wins, he moves on towards getting the ghosts from the Paths of the Dead, which just proves that he is who Sauron thinks he is, since only the heir to Isildur's heir could do that. He takes the ghosts and he takes out the Corsairs and then frees the ghosts. No, he does not take them to Minas Tirith. That's movie. Didn't mind it, but he does not take them to Minas Tirith. He takes out the Corsairs using the ghosts and his 100 rangers that were with him, and then he fills the Corsairs' ships with armies from those allied nations that hadn't sent reinforcements because they were worried about the Corsairs, and arrives at the Battle of Pelennor Fields with an army of various people from those allied nations to take out the orcs in the field. And that again is just the first wave. And after that, Gandalf does the whole suggestion. We're going to go. Gandalf pulls a war council together with all the kings and everybody, and explains in detail what it is exactly that they are doing. He tells them all that everything has been a distraction. We're trying to give Frodo time to get time and ability to get to the Cracks of Doom. He tells all the kings this because at this point they're so close to the finishing line that it doesn't matter, and it's going to be hard for anybody to get word to get to Sauron, especially since they've shut down a lot of things like the Palantir and all that. So he gets together all. So and Aragorn says, "Okay, we're going to march on Blackgate." That was Aragorn's idea, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read, because I've had this stuff in storage due to circumstances. But anyway, he decides, yes, we're going to go march on Blackgate, and this will have Sauron looking at me. And Gandalf approves because that goes towards his overall strategy. Everything he's doing is to preserve the people that he can that are in front of him, and to distract Sauron. This is not boring invincible hero. The very fact that his skill-wise would be what some people would say boring invincible hero is, the fact that he can pwn Sauron even with a cheap trick psychically, and that he can take on pretty much any enemy physically that he ran across except for the Balrog, which he didn't even try to fight, which again is another point against boring invincible hero. He didn't fight the Wildshire in the water either. They just ran into the building and tried to cut off the tentacles, and then they all ran into the building. That's again not boring invincible hero. He's not killing everything in sight that gives any hints. They're running from a lot of stuff. The very fact that he is as strong as he is, mentally, physically, and emotionally, and spiritually, and yet he is not going to be the one that wins the battle, and he's not enough to win the battle, just underscores Tolkien's point that force of arms is not going to win the day. And that's really the reason why Aragorn should have remained as really badass as he was in the book. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end here because I'm getting close to 20 minutes.